Joe Johnson, Umbra Arts Summer Institute, 1999, oral history. Joe Johnson.
1:40 a.m. p.m. The time. So,
Little late, but
that's all right. That's all right. First, I'd like to thank David for having me come out. And I mean, this is for me a very important thing to do. And the energy that David has put together a program of people who are very important and crucial to the development of art in America, black art specifically. And it all focuses on the period of that time in the 60s, which was called, how should I say, you can call it whatever you want to call it. But in that period, on the Lower East Side, there was a group of young writers who had an idea. The idea was originally started by Calvin Herndon, David, and Tom Dent. And one of the things that came out of this meeting of these three writers was the possibility of doing a magazine that would be the product of a workshop. The workshop had many aspects to it. It was a place where you can vent and you can invent. I think a lot of it was inventing in addition to venting. But I think it's best described by the foreword that was written for the first issue of Umbra. Umbra is not another haphazard little literary publication. Umbra has a definite orientation. Yes? One, the experience of being Negro, especially in America, and two, the quality of human awareness, often termed social consciousness. These were very important forces and tenets of Umbra because it embraced both the particular aspect of being black in America and opening that to that possibility of being socially conscious, which means involving and embracing the consciousness of the America that we wanted and that we needed. So therefore it had not, although it started from the specifics of our culture, it was by no means parochial by any means. The foreword goes on to say, we do not exist for those seemingly selected perennial and bestsellers and literary spokesmen of the race situation who are currently popular in the commercial press and slick in-group journals. Which it's a wonderful, broadside against what was going on. I mean, I think that one of the penning of this was, I think, done in part by Calvin, who had some very interesting things to say about race and about culture, about sex, and later come out in his work, Sex and Racism. Let me go on. There are unpublished and infrequently published ethnic writers whose works are excellent, important, and often far superior to those adopted view from which the standard press habitually and expediently affords the public. Okay. You can hear the sound, the edge. There's a kind of quality of youth and energy, naivete, but yet at the same time, the beginning of an important ideological position that's being formulated. Umbra exists to promote the vehicle for those outspoken and youthful writers who present aspects of social and racial reality which may be called uncommercial, unpalatable, unpopular, unwanted, but cannot with any honesty be considered non-essential to the whole and the healing of society. So that in addition to presenting the specifics of black culture, there was an attempt and an effort, a genuine effort made to present the historical situation of African Americans in the human context of its art, its culture, its forces, in an arena which everyone tried to narrow it out. So that in essence, Umbra had within it all of the elements of a diasporic literature, and at the same time, it had the force and energy of people coming together from different classes, different places, and that was something unique. Not only that, but there were white members of Umbra. So that therefore you had, on a very realistic level, an integration of not only this cultural place, which is called the Lower East Side, historically, where people moved in and out, but you had a place where people who were black and people who were white could talk about things that were black. And in talking about them, they created a forum that provided an important focus for the writing that was to come out of the 60s. The writings which were culturally nationalistic, the writings which I wouldn't probably call integrationist, but writings which avoided the strident issues which were to come up in the late 60s and early 70s, because they thought, as Herndon mentioned in his foreword, they thought that they were ideologically very shrill and in some cases baseless. Because Umbra is not preoccupied with monetary or prestige considerations, it can afford to offer a platform to writers who are young, unknown, or too hard on our society. The subject matter of the accepted journals is too often dictated by the fears of the backers, the views of the readers whom those journals fear to lose. We maintain no iron-fisted, bigoted policy of preference or exclusion of material. Umbra will not be a propagandistic, a psychopathic, or an ideological axe grinder. We will not print trash, no matter how irrelevant it deals with race, social issues, or anything else. We're not a self-deemed radical publication. We are as radical as the society demands the truth to be. We declare in an unequivocal commitment to material of literary integrity and artistic excellence, which was a strong stand. A strong stand. Very strong stand. Can I get an amen on that? We will finance ourselves by contributions, sales of the magazine, fundraising parties. A writer whose material we use will receive 2 copies of the issue, which his work appears. We hope your support will enable us to eventually reward our contributors in cash. Never came about, but it was a good idea. A self-addressed envelope, which is stamped, that must accompany any unsolicited manuscript. Send us your material, your poetry, your short stories, articles, and essays. And if you believe Umbra deserves to survive and to grow, a subscription would help. Umbra exists for you. It's great. I mean, it was the tone. I mean, it was captured in a way that brought out and welcomed people who are generally displaced. When I say displaced people, generally when you think of expatriates, you think of them outside of the United States. But many of the expatriates we could consider exiles from within. And many of the people who first came to Umbra were exiles. Exiles from middle-class situations, upper middle-class situations, from lumpen situations, like myself, an exile from the projects. And we found that there was something that we had to talk about. Now, when Tom and Patterson, Raymond Patterson, because there were other Pattersons to come, and Lloyd Addison, when they talked about the possibility of putting together a magazine or a workshop, there was a need. Tom, in some interviews, Tom Dent talks about how in talking to Raymond Patterson, that Patterson put him in contact with Calvin Herndon. And these were guys, and through David, Calvin through David. David, you were a friend of Calvin's, so therefore you know. So that's how we. And I found out about David from a friend of mine came up to my house. I was living above the place which they call Slugs at the time, and there was a woman. I don't know if you remember, a Joyce Burke, and Emerson Washington. It was like the ideal couple. And she said, Joseph, there's a young guy down there living in your area that you should know. His name is David Henderson. He writes poetry, and he's very, very good. Joyce Burke. She was a very clean, middle-class lady. Went to Hunter College. Her parents had aspirations for her to become a teacher. And then she met a friend of mine, Emerson Washington. Well, he didn't lead her to Emerson Washington. And they gave him the highest possible reviews. So I said, I gotta meet this guy. And then, of course, it all came together. I mean, that meeting which we had, I think it was right across the street, 242 East 2nd or something like that, where Tom, the first meeting, you were there, Tom, Calvin, I think maybe Lloyd Addison was there, and then Raymond Pattison. And we were talking about, I think, I don't know if Nora was there, or no, Calvin wasn't there, but maybe Nora. And of course, Jane Logan Pondexter, who was a very close friend of Tom's at that point. And Tom, in his normal, serious voice, talked about the possibility of getting together. And the wonderful thing about the whole place was a very comfortable place. There are only two things you could do. You could go to the living room was the room that that Tom lived in, and then there was a kitchen which you could eat, and there was a bathroom which you could shit. So it was just essential, like a submarine. Everything was very, very tight. So whenever you had an argument at these meetings, you could never really leave the argument. It was a sort of a physical environment which contained you. It was everybody, when they talked about stuff and they had heated opinion, was on lockup. They were locked down in that situation, and they had to fight the issues out. So that it was a very important space, because I think that everyone knew at that time. Some worked, some didn't work. Everyone knew at that time that on Fridays, there's a place that you could come and you could drink wine from a big gallon jug, and you can talk about things that you were writing. So it became a natural magnet for all the displaced people, especially the young black writers who had a lot to say. Now, in this group, the point of development was, it was uneven. I think that both Tom and Calvin, and remarkably for his age at that time, David, were very developed writers. They were writers who had a vision of the culture. Much of it inspired, I think, in influences that came from people that, I would say, Hughes, his hand was there. His hand was there. They had mastered a kind of a colloquial rhythm, which was not in any way slick or glossy or stylized. It was coming from the honest place of Calvin and Tom's southern roots, from David's experiences in the Bronx. And it had focused, the writing was focused on the experience, the text of their lives. So therefore, when they were to write poems about themselves, and they would write poems about their experience, it was not as if they were, taking it from the standpoint of beginnings writers. They were coming to it from the vantage point of knowing essentially the trouble that they were in, and the trouble in terms of the spiritual angst in which they had to take themselves out of to find themselves. And they knew, like I knew, and most of the writers who came there, that this was the forum, this was the place. It was a place which was never relaxed. It always had a very, very competitive edge to it. The competition came out of not only listening to the criticism, which was sometimes well received and sometimes it wasn't well received. It came out of the need for most of the writers to improve. When I say improvement, to take what they were working and fashion it into not so much a tool or an instrument, but more or less a weapon. The weapon was not directed toward any kind of a white target. The primary focus of the weapon was to go inside and destroy that part of them as artists which was weak and that could not accept the harshness, the cruelty of the society. And they had to burn out all of that weakness. So therefore, it was a process of forging themselves into strong individuals, so that the writing of that period comes out in a way which has a kind of, how should I say, a quiet kind of anguish. For example, in Tom's poem, the figurine of dreams and sometimes nightmares in that section of the first issue of Umbra. Tom Dent writes a poem about night dreams, black. Being beat down, I would fly away on wings of a hawk to Burma or Peru or 141st Street, where black memories lie on float, ascending like soft cigarette smoke. Memories float. Their persistence terrorized me, like awakening tigers clawing at the cage of my mask. Were I a tiger, were I ever a tiger, were I to reject tigerness, would I cry a tiger's roar? Were I a tiger roar, a cry against my cage, cage my tiger. Gloria was my son, would I forget that? What was my child in growing? You tell me that Harlem is jazz, black suit-suited women. Strange float of 1,000 street corners of my generation, and now that weaves extending into the trickling, lazy flow to the cold pavement where leaping roaches and muffled cries lie. Your nakedness is my beauty. Cat me in, wiggle me out, my apple of love, too tough to mount. Trees blown away, tears washed away, dreams terrorized away. Then my child is the youngness of me, and you which add to nothing and nothing and equals hot nights, freezing colder, the still girl, her head shoved into the toilet bowl, remains silently fixed in the picture of our love moments, central to our love moments, inextricable. Was her scream drowned by our own loving, perhaps? Perhaps she was already cold. Sweet murder, Harlem lover, sweet murder, knifing the heart of the loved ones, knifing the heart of the chosen, as always. That kind of intensity it's not a mask, it's not a pretense, it's something which is flowing from the very inner part of this writing. And that was the kind of writing that this workshop would be pushed into doing. The reason why I say pushed into doing is because it wasn't a foot race. It was an attempt to find an acceptance which was not based on agreement, but acceptance that would come in the form of people saying, you're there, you hit it. And to do that required that the work have a certain energy and honesty. It had a form of people who demographically probably fit in terms of the black population, all of the classes, all of the groups, they were there. So any kind of falseness about that would be soon blown away. There was no place. Your whole card could always be peaked. The meetings were the form in which I think, for me, was a place to see my isolation from that culture which I was a part of. It was that objective distance when I heard the pain, when I saw the possibilities of the pain. I saw there was a possibility of a remedy, not a cure, but a remedy. A means in which a person could find, in the context of writing and art, a place to ease some suffering. Not to eradicate, but to ease some suffering. There was a comradeship, because there was an agreement, although it wasn't really spoken out, that existed between the people in number, that they were on your side. They were on your side. They would, as Steve Cannon says, they would heckle. Yeah. And that was an important ingredient, not in a destructive way, but in a very constructive way, which would allow people to write with a kind of passion and a fixedness of vision. When in the introduction there's a mention there would be no ideological axis to be run. That didn't prove entirely true, because what happens is that when you're in this kind of debate, there are bound to be schisms and fractures and all kinds of visions of what the group should be. And it's the very place where this kind of ideological ferment should start. And it begins there. It begins because it's a definition of African American art, which is being formed in terms of one road which is taking a very strident nationalistic point of view. And another group that's saying that within the context of America there is a place for my art, although I have misgivings about America, but there's a place for my art which is not isolated artistically in terms of its standards, not isolated in terms of what it means and it can mean to other people. So therefore these schisms, these groups, these clashes were underway. For those who probably, probably some of the tapes talk about the detail, about the history of how Umber ended. But I'm not of the opinion that Umber ever ended. I'm saying that there were serious differences that were to appear over art and ideology. The art, of course, was I think David probably has some strong feelings about this, about the groups that formed. One was more or less, it was over the poem that was about, had a lot to do with the assassination of President Kennedy, whether or not it should be published or shouldn't be published. The editors thought that maybe in good taste that we might move away from that. Within that group there was a certain faction that said, no, let it fall where it may. And as a result, that was, it tended to be a very divisive point in the history of Umber. Because at that point, the line was drawn between those who were nationalistic, cultural nationalistic, which was called later, and those who were poets who thought that, hey, we can't say that the world is all black. And in doing so, that would impose certain limits. Now, these were necessary tendencies within the movement of art, and especially black art during that period, because they helped to define the dimensions and the directions of where the art was to go. It was absolutely necessary for this disagreement to occur. But in the midst of that disagreement, there was never really a kind of a serious leading away of a love of the culture from which the art was inspired. No one ever deserted that idea. And although you have a tremendous range in terms of the writers, in terms of what they took up, I mean, in terms of a focus, some of the writers were to go with Mary Baraka and form the Black Arts movement, or work with him, Skirmana Torre, Charles and William Patterson. These were some of the writers who had, creative and editorial differences with the board. But they never left, with some arguments unresolved, but they never left in terms of being totally divorced from those experiences, which had, to a large degree, had shaped and informed their ideological development. Let me just read a few more of the poems that appear in the first issue. Yeah.
Hold the cover up.
Oh, the cover, certainly. Okay, this is the
I
first cover. The cover was Tom Felix.
Just hold it right in front
Okay.
of us. And I'm going to, that's perfect. And I'm going to zoom in on that. And just hold it a little bit up.
Higher?
No.
Down?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
That's perfect. Okay, and I'm going to zoom back. Great. Okay.
Yeah,
There it is. Cool.
This is the first issue. You were 20 when the first issue came out, David.
Pardon me?
You were 20.
Oh, okay.
It says that here. And I was 24. And let's see, Ray Patterson was 33. Lorenzo was 18. He was a youngster. Let me just read one poem. This is a poem I wrote during the period. It's called Hiroshima Ultra Bad. The flesh dangles about my frame, my sinew passé dangles. I have no beyond red pain heat. The seared dream of hell-dripping tissue. The flower's ash, the flesh are one beneath the flame. I like that one. That's me. That's me. That's me. There's another poem which is by a poet called David Henderson. It's called Time and Atavism.
Oh, please.
Oh, I gotta do it. I gotta do it.
It's your origin?
In this dark alien room that once was mine, my young dusty brown brother lies along a bed. His limbs are amazingly extended since the last I had seen him. His wide mouth open, showing large, clumsily arranged teeth. I, the stranger who dared to venture to a place never existed save a reference, and who, in viewing my sleeping brother, despairs the first breath of contiguous being, especially those born at odd and wing of time and atavism. My brother awakes and stretches to embrace me. He falls back to sleep. His head is in the lap. Tears are in my eyes, spurred by the knowledge that I will never fall. I, the fuzzy-headed frail boy in his arms, saliva from his open mouth, wetting my pants and tight skin, sit pondering out perhaps converse, a difficult position with time and atavism. I mean, this is like the other poems. It has a kind of, an interesting kind of psychological displacement. Everybody is an exile, and they're writing about it from the context of the unique, particular experience of being black. This is, it deviates from a kind of, it doesn't deviate from the folk, but it takes in terms of the level of trying to express the feeling, the dreams of the folks, and puts it in the level of an art which is finding a form, finding a place within the complex developments of contemporary American literature. The important thing about it is that the writers who were part of this workshop were all participating in that life that was creating the cultural context of the Lower East Side. They were never devoid or separated from what their contemporaries, whether it was the New York School of Poets, the C Street Poets, or of those who remained from Black Mountain or other groups of poets who were in that area of the avant-garde. This was, in effect, an extension of those avant-garde movements in poetry and experimentation, which took on a different color. The color that it took on was black. It was an important color because the writers were talking about their particular experience and the validity of their experience within the context of using all of those techniques, all of those forms which were available to those people who were pushing the language forward. So it put it in a new context. It was no longer slips or rhymes. It would take elements of that. It would take the colloquial literature, the literature that had the fast quality, the rhythms, the beats, and it would formalize it into a new literature. And that's the importance of most of the things which were going on. It had taken the vernacular and had elevated it to a point in which it became personal tools for these individual writers to express pain, the angst, the hatred, the sense of self-worth and definition of a culture and putting themselves within the context of that culture. I think that when we look at Umbra, we can't really frame it in a past context. It operated within the context of all of the experimentation that was going on during the 60s in the Lower East Side. It operated in connection with the movements of theater, the Negro Ensemble Company, La Mama, all of these experimental works and productions. It was at a time that was inconvenient for the society insofar as the society wasn't ready for the anger and the confrontation and the quality of the ideology that was to develop. But it was convenient for the writers because at this time that the society in terms of the movements and civil rights, the movements in terms of personal awareness of the freedom that the society from its was breaking from the shackles of a sort of a post-war, post-McCarthy period, was coming into its essence. It had gone beyond beat, it had gone beyond hip, it had reached the point where the writers who were in the Society of Umbra, in collaboration with the forces of the contemporary are for building a new idiom. I think that I'd like to play maybe just a selection of tapes so that I can work on some of the things which come up.
Position of microphone.
Okay.
Okay. You might want to wipe your...
Oh, I'm dribbling on the side? I'm salivating.
No, but...
Foam is coming out of my mouth. Thank you. Well, if you saw it, folks, it denotes a little bit of earnestness on my part.
Right.
Let's see what's here.
No one really does that to my knowledge. What about charge? Is that trying to...
No,
This is Steve Cannon.
Yeah, he tried to talk about that whole community that we were on.
Okay, let me just okay. Okay. This was a tape done in 1975 with, I'm trying to get to so many things in because I think that a lot of things, for the sake of, for the president, for the future, should be incorporated. These are some of the tapes which we'll probably work on and have, in the upper archives eventually. A selection from, okay. Oh. How are we doing for time? It's all right. I mean, let me stop. I mean,
Stop?
yeah, I mean, that's it.
Stop on what?
Oh, okay.
We're flipping tapes.
Is there any smoking allowed in this building or what?
Is there what?
Smoking allowed.
Not in the library.
Okay.
Do you want to take a break and have a seat?
No, I think we should just run through it. Do you want to?
Okay. Ready?
Let me just, this is some of the selections from a tape that was made in 1975 or 74, circa, of Tom Dent on the tape, and I think it's also Steve Cannon. Steve Cannon, yes, was in the house. Let me just play a few sections and talk about what we've heard.
It took going back to
This is Tom Dent.
to be able to digest. Now, what it means to me, coming from the perspective, even when I write about the song, is that there was a tremendous exposure before its time to all the new development of urban black writing and black consciousness.
Okay, certainly. In the tape, Tom is talking about the... Okay.
Take effect. Are you recording now? Something's wrong with the machine.
No, let me just do this.
You all right now? You want some water? You want to take a break for a minute or 2 minutes?
Let's shoot another tape. Shoot another one.
There's water outside, right?
Recording with the machine, with the video. Okay, good.
Find something. Yeah, I was just saying that, when we talk about the Emperor experience, how it would have an impact, you have to realize that all the writers were never in any kind of cultural isolation. They were always involved, like David had, connections with the Black Actors Guild. He used to play softball, right?
The Nigger actor?
Yeah. And
John Monet?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
President.
So it was never, always in the group, there was a connection between not only, the written arts and the dramatic arts, but also the painters, the musicians, they were all, you know, sort of a primary focus, so that we have to look at it as sort of a holistic kind of an enterprise, where the concepts that the painters were exhausting, like Overstreet and other guys, photographers were always involved. There's Leroy Lucas, Al Simon, and the musicians like Archie Shepp and Don Cherry and those guys. They were always close in terms of the impact of it. The thing is that the influences that the writers are drawing from were vast. I mean, being in New York and being in New York at that time, I mean, opened the door for writers to not only to develop their art, but to understand the source of their art. And I think this is a tape that I made a number of years ago. And Tom Dent is who went on to work with the Southern Free Theater. Is talking about the effects of the Umber experience and the experience of being in the North, and how that had a direct bearing on his writing in the South.
Because even though I moved to New York,
Do you think that you were in exile when you were in New York?
no, I didn't think myself as an exile because I wanted to be in New York. You know, I came to New York deliberately, purpose. And I think when you were in exile, you're in a place where you didn't necessarily want to be there. Like I think Will is in exile. And that's a killer. And that's a killer.
This is Steve Cannon is also doing the interview.
So you think Herndon's success was the first success, or in the introduction, there's a statement about Umber exists to provide a vehicle for those outspoken, youthful writers who present aspects of social and racial reality which may be called uncommercial, unpalatable, unpopular, unwanted, but cannot with any honesty be considered not.
In this particular statement, we were struggling for a statement of what we would easily call now Black consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
But at that time, we just didn't write it that way. Because I think we were very concerned about each writer's individual direction and the right of even a black writer to write like Raymond Patterson had a beautiful poem about the suit. About
Resurrection Day.
Resurrection Day. Which is that in the first song?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's the reason why we didn't jump right into We All Black magazine, young black writers who want to knock the world with all black.
How was the Herndon success greeted? The Contract for Sex and Racism by Doubleday. I think it was in 63, was it, or 60?
Well, you know,